long and perilous detour into the night of my soul.
Folks, I'm not doing so hot right now. Things in the world are looking pretty grim. So, I'm going to talk about something happy. Like a game about two of the saddest men you've ever met, where one of them turns into a cockroach, which somehow lets him fix everything. The weirdest man you could possibly meet once said, "There are cathedrals everywhere for those with the eyes to see." The fact that he was saying this about a disposable plastic water bottle has extremely little to do with my epithet, but I suppose nor does it help his case. Now that I've stirred up a wasp's nest and probably turned my comment section into a toxic waste dump, which may or may not intentionally be a reference considering who the guy is, I'd like to share with you one of my cathedrals in gaming. Beautiful, but so esoteric and such that nobody would take my sentiments seriously without an attached dissertation. While I fade into the actual meat of the essay, I must warn you that today's game will involve discussions of death, suicide, child abuse, bullying, homophobia, and in the visual department, a bit of rat gore, and exactly as many cockroaches as you can guess from the video's title. Bad Mojo reads conceptually like something you would expect out of someone who claims to have a quote-unquote love-hate relationship with anime, but then only ever releases parody visual novels that shit on the art form basically for being enjoyed by women, but in words that will make a certain kind of professional critic, or person who likens himself to one, mark out. Bad Mojo is a CGI and live-action adventure game, from an era where adventure games were kind of niche but some folks still occasionally thought they were cool, but more importantly, where they were, almost to a one, unimaginably cheesy, that puts the player in control of a cockroach in a dingy bar, restaurant, and apartment. It is, no surprise, pretty gross and full of some things that will make your skin crawl a little. The game even leans into its gross out angle, priding itself on it enough to subtitle itself The Roach Game on its initial release. Welcome back to the 90s, gang! It is also a truly harrowing tale of the most depressing man you've ever met and his equally depressing son, two men who just cannot catch a single break in life. Since this one's a little on the obscure side, though, we're going to start with a very basic plot summary because I feel like I'm less likely to be preaching to any choirs here. Being a piece of media themed around cockroaches, obviously things begin with an homage of sorts to Franz Kafka's The Metamorphoses. Roger Sams, whose name is not too far off from an anagram of that of Gregor Samsa from The Metamorphoses, and which even sounds the part, is a sleazy motherfucker. Sure, he's an entomologist who's been working on a new substance to kill cockroaches, but he's also been swindling a lot of money from a chemical company. Right now, he's living in a pretty dinky apartment over an abandoned bar owned by one Eddie Battito. Roger's planning on skipping town with his massive amount of embezzled cash, but after Eddie comes in demanding his rent and telling him a bad joke about locking his door, which, you know, he already had done until you came around, Skippy, Roger remembers a locket he's had since childhood and goes back to pick it up to take with him. But when he collects the oddly cockroach motif-bearing locket, he turns into a cockroach, and thus begins his incredibly dangerous journey. And wow, that is a strange thing to give a child, but also it looks really cool, and the amount of like film props or anything I'd want to own is pretty much just this thing. And yes, I would take it with me everywhere, even, and perhaps especially, where it was least appropriate. So this video was already going to be a short one because we're cutting around most of the gameplay stuff, which I admit is pretty janky, yet another stumbling block for this title, but I'm going to shorten it even more by dropping the big spoiler on you right away. Roger is Eddie's son, and neither of them knows it until you hit the good ending. Yeah, I'm sure most of you are really shocked by this twist. It's easy enough to just blindly guess this with minimal knowledge of the game, but it becomes even more blatant early on when you notice that Roger's guiding spirit looks an awful lot like the pictures of Eddie's wife, which would be a strange but not impossible thing to have happen unless they were the same person, and what's the easiest explanation for why Roger would know Eddie's dead wife, particularly in relation to this thing he's had since he was a child? Okay, sure, there are a couple of possible excuses you could pick as to why this is before you get there. For example, the studio not having many actors to hand, or maybe Raj knew Eddie's wife from however long he'd been living in the apartment. But bits of this quickly start getting cut off, leaving this as the only answer that makes sense well before you find out what happens. I have no problems with them going this route, and I think it just makes the ending feel better. It's obvious, yes, but I don't think it constitutes bad writing. Or at least that's what I'm saying, because I don't like the idea of throwing this whole game out in one go over a predictable narrative, and I don't think lazy narrative choices are fine sometimes if the writing is still fire is a conversation any of us are ready to have. Certainly not in a forum this public. Anyway, to round out my plot summary, Roger has to navigate the building, being guided by a mysterious spirit guide who is also Eddie's dead wife / Roger's dead mom, as he discovers who he is. Along the way, he has to mess with the pilot light in the downstairs stove, causing the building to slowly fill with gas. He and Eddie both have a chance to escape, provided he's able to either wake Eddie and or get back to his body during the final timed segment, but the building ends up exploding no matter what. I'll discuss those endings briefly later on, but for now, let's talk about our cast. Now we'll start with Eddie because his story is a little shorter. And Angelina, they're kind of a package deal. Yeah, Angelina has no real character development outside of being Eddie's wife and her death. And I know, and I don't disagree. This is one of the very few times when I will look at an instance of what is at least pretty damn near a woman being stuffed into a refrigerator and say I don't think it turns the entire story into shit for me. I think this is probably just because I like the rest of the story, and she is one of literally only 3 actual characters in this story, meaning that while you're not about to come out of this thinking of Bad Mojo as a particularly feminist story, I don't think this is enough to really say anything major about the writing team. Other characters have gotten it so much worse from writers whose work is far more suggestive of at least a small amount of misogyny in their worldviews. A couple that come to mind are Alice Brangwyn from Phantasy Star 4 to some extent, and to a much greater one, Locke's girlfriend in Final Fantasy VI, something which I think tends to get glossed over in discussions of FF6. Eddie Battito doesn't really have a lot going for him at any point in his life. He opens a moderately successful bar and restaurant, which seems to be his passion, but not after a lot of setbacks and mess, though we don't get a ton of details. He's a war veteran. You can find that he has a medal in his belongings that looks like a Purple Heart but mirrored. That's probably just an issue with the prop. Now, in case you didn't know, veterans don't have a great go of things here in the US. Probably anywhere, but this is where I know. For all the posturing we have about never forgetting and not leaving people behind, the government tends to not give war vets any sort of attention or concern whatsoever when they return home. It's truly disgusting the way our society simply uses human beings, expends their lives like a resource in the name of the empire. But this video is gonna bum you out enough as it is, so maybe let's save that for some other time. Eddie ends up in debt to a guy, and we see his attempts at trying to get out of it as a boxing coach don't end well. As the owner and operator of an eatery, he's hardly at the top of the food chain in the world. He's not really a winner, but he's happy, especially when he's married to Angelina. Angelina really seems to be the most important aspect of Eddie's life. I'm not sure I expected to have fair cause to write the phrase wife guy in the script about the Roach game, but listen, every one of our main characters actually rules and deserves the best they can get their hands on. Angelina dies in childbirth. Yes, I know. In case I haven't made it clear, this story is one I cut a lot of slack on because it's actually utterly gut-wrenching instead of just playing things for cheap drama. Her death casts Eddie into a deep depression. He immediately hands off his baby son to an orphanage, something he regrets for his entire life. He loses all interest in maintaining the bar properly, and he's unable to renovate it to bring it in line with modern safety codes before he loses his liquor license because he supposedly served alcohol to a minor. He's even driven to the brink of suicide. We get to see him go up to the bridge he was going to throw himself off before he gets a pep talk from someone important to him and reconsiders. He heard the right thing from the right person at the right time, which, believe you me, can do a lot of good for your mental health. It's pretty easy to perceive Eddie as having been spending this much time living his life only for someone else, which, yeah, I totally get that. Without delving too much into my personal life and my horrid mental health, I've been struggling hard for a very long time with this sort of thing, with feeling like the only reason I live my life is to be a friend to a few other people. But a friend said things at just the right time, in an offhand way, not even addressing me or knowing what a disaster my mental health was, and I started to take that advice to heart. Granted, that's been taking a bit of a hit lately due to world events, but I'm still trying. The point is that it can be very hard to pull yourself out of that rut. It's probably a good thing Eddie had his wife's ghost to talk him down. However, this doesn't compare at all to the story of our good friend and playable character, Roger Sams, whose story is one of the saddest I've seen in video games, period. Roger was given up to an orphanage run by a nun as a child, and she's just a real piece of work. It's overdramatic, but that's already how the game is to begin with. And in a case like this, perhaps it can be seen as child Roger thinking it was more overboard than it actually was, assuming you're the sort of vermin who wants to downplay child abuse. But the nun straight up tells Roger that he was unloved and a burden unto the world.
Roger, I told you never to play with that. The man who gave that toy to you is a worthless bum who abandoned you and left you with nothing but a hideous locket and that pathetic monkey.
That's not true. He would have kept me if he could.
He never wanted you. It was because of you that he lost your mother. She died while having you.
No matter how overdramatic the acting comes across, this is 100% a real thing that happens to real people. Needless to say, some folks just need to never be around children and especially barred from raising them. Yet I'm sure someone like this absolute stain and the people like her in real life are convinced they're really good at child rearing. The abuse that Roger suffers at the hands of this extremely horrible person really fucks him up, leading to one of the most viscerally upsetting sequences in the entire game. While exploring Roger's apartment, we get to see one of his childhood drawings, and like many things at this part of the game, we get to see it become an animation, leading us to witness the lovely image of this drawing of him as a baby stabbing his mom to death in the hospital, and holy fuck, I don't think I have the mental capacity to fully envision what it must feel like to be that traumatized. I really can't grasp how heavy of a psychological burden this must be. How does this man keep it together in his day-to-day life? I think this is one of the most fucked things I've seen in this category ever. The fact that it's communicated through an animated version of a child's drawing as opposed to anything involving more humans just makes this more effective. It's so far from the truth, but it's how Roger really saw things back then, and maybe still does at this point. And it's the direct consequence of this absolutely repulsive creature I'm not even entirely comfortable calling a human being because of how vile she was. This is a depiction of extreme guilt. You combine this with the bullying from his peers, including a bit of homophobia because it's bullying.
Hey, Sam.
What?
Nope.
Roach boy, let me see your bug hut. Where'd you get the roaches? Your mama's kitchen?
Which, yeah, that's pretty accurate to how most bullies are. Thankfully, I mostly got bullied for being autistic as far as I can remember, but I've been trying to blank out as much of myself from before I was 30 as possible. And yeah, Roger had an unimaginably shitty childhood. He is a total wreck. This man would kill it on Tumblr if people could get past the gross concept of the game between this and being so awkward looking. I kinda hope fan art of this guy abruptly starts taking off. He's prime Blorbo material. In fact, even as an adult, the problems don't stop for Roger. He is smart. So smart that he's got a doctorate and works at a university, and corporations are all too willing to take advantage of this. While his novel idea doesn't take immediate hold when he suggests it to another researcher, a pesticide company hands him a buttload of cash to make a new chemical that can kill cockroaches because he's pretty knowledgeable about that. The university, of course, is breathing down his neck. Roger feels like he's being overly scrutinized, and it's clearly eating him, with him having scrawled the phrase, "All eyes are on me," all over part of his work area, and he's covered it in cutouts of human eyes, including one that follows you on the screen you're on. Perhaps this is why he chose to steal the grant money. Roger's transformation into a cockroach has some pretty obvious symbolism. There are two common traits one associates with cockroaches: being dirty and being extremely hard to put down. In particular, that filthiness is associated with squalor. One typically is considered to only end up getting cockroaches in their house if it's a particularly dirty place, because cockroaches are scavengers. Roger's life has been a mess and horrible things have been happening to him constantly. It's not completely unreasonable to make a connection between that and something that lives in a messy place. But more obviously, Roger has been hanging on and trying to eke out success despite all the shit being thrown at him from all sides constantly. He's already a metaphorical cockroach, so why not a literal one too? Roger's cockroach locket is a gift from his parents, a symbol of endurance Eddie handed down to a child that he loved dearly but didn't think he could raise right to encourage him to survive in the harsh world he was about to be cast into. And he does, made even more clear by the fact that he says cockroaches are the first thing that ever really inspired him. Unfortunate that it's the same repeated symbol over and over again, but the theme still worms its way through. Also of note is the fact that Roger's scheme involves stealing from a chemical company. Cockroaches are famously dirty, sure, but they're not major disease vectors. Not like, say, mosquitoes. Roger, and this take might be considered a little hot, and I'll discuss it in more depth shortly, isn't hurting anyone. He's embezzling money from a pesticide company. Real people work at a pesticide company, but if he's trying to hurt anyone, he's aiming for the head. The university, at worst, will probably suffer some shame and not get to work with the company anymore. Which, whoopty shit, big loss, you don't get to develop more poisons that will inevitably fail when roaches suddenly develop a glucose aversion in the 2010s or something. One interesting thing I remembered while scripting this bit is that Roger works for the Battito group. Battidae being the name of the family that contains several of the most common species of cockroach you might find in your house. Oddly enough, the game appears to mostly use German cockroaches, which are actually from the family Ectobidae. But okay, ignoring weird trivia for a sec, I think there's something to this. I'd have to take a little more time to think about what it is, but the idea produces an image of self-destruction. Roger definitely seems like the kind of guy to become his own worst enemy. But in a less direct way, you could look at this more like Roger is hurting himself if he pursues this bug spray project any further, and it's clear that he knew that. That's why he stole all the money and prepared to skip town. Even if he decided to pursue such a project later in life, once he was free from his corporate shackles, it would be of his own volition. His status as a metaphorical cockroach would still be there, but his more literal status as a member of Battidae, and how much you want to bet these guys call their employees family too, just to drive the point home, would be annulled. Is this making sense? I kind of worry that I'm making too wide a leap here, or I'm like abandoning something in a way that doesn't make a lot of sense, or something along those lines. There's one thing I haven't accounted for here though, which is that the donor who gives Roger the big chunk of money for his project remains anonymous. I assume the connection you're supposed to draw, especially after all the supernatural stuff associated with Angelina, is that it's some sort of a guardian angel type of thing, basically. But I have nothing else to add past that because the details run out here. It becomes easier to empathize with Roger as time goes on. The more I played this, the more I realized I didn't really care that his actions were incredibly slimy on paper, and the more I realized that his self-introduction early on casts him in the worst light possible. Roger Sams never really hurt anyone. The worst he did was take $1 million from a fucking pesticide company. I know that pest control is an important thing, but pesticides have probably done just about more harm than good given how toxic some of them are. So while this is probably a little late for the company to be manufacturing DDT, anybody kicking that industry in the nadgers is a hero until proven otherwise as far as I'm concerned. It feels like he's trying to get revenge on a world that spent 30 years or so wiping its ass with him constantly. It just feels like he was taking every W that the world has owed him up to this point all at once. Why not make himself a millionaire at the expense of people who are just using his intellect? He's a slimy, self-centered criminal, but you start rooting for him. If only you could get Eddie something like that too. Alright! So at the end of the game, you end up unavoidably blowing up the bar by fucking with the pilot light. There are 4 different endings you can get here, one for each combination of 2 major characters living or dying. If both die, their ghosts, along with Angelina's, haunt the location forever. If only Eddie lives, he ends up a homeless drunk. If only Roger lives, he ends up in an insane asylum. If both live, though, get ready for one hell of a golden ending. Roger escapes with $1 million in embezzled money, and he and Eddie react to the exploding bar just as Eddie spots his locket and recognizes it and the picture inside, causing the two to realize they're father and son. Police start to arrive on the scene, so they bail, and skip town down to Mexico near Belize, sharing the money, with Eddie buying a new bar and Roger setting up a small lab to do roach experiments. Roger gets away with everything, and both of them get to just live their best lives together, vibing and pursuing their passions. It's a far more beautiful thing than it probably should be, but it's so good. They've earned this one, and really, what's $1 million to some fucking corporation that's pissing on the earth anyway? For anyone who wants to say that Roger, or real-world scientists who develop pesticides, should get the hammer dropped on them, maybe, but also, I think they still by and large don't advise people to go as nuts with pesticides as the corpos do. They're a bit more neutral than anything, I'd say. After all, science and technology are a neutral force, depending entirely upon who uses them. I've been calling attention to how many crimes Roger committed for a reason. See, Roger absolutely embezzled a crap ton of money, drugged an old man, is responsible for blowing up that bar even though he was not in his own body at the time. Excuse me if I don't find a lawyer to ask if it's still illegal to turn off the pilot light in a building and directly lead to it exploding if you're in a cockroach body. But here's the thing. Justice and the law are not necessarily equivalent. In fiction, and I need to make it very clear that I'm only discussing fiction here, and stories showing things shouldn't inherently be considered to be promoting it, sometimes justice and getting what one deserves are extra-legal affairs. Think about it this way. Have you ever seen a story of revenge where the wronged party goes and kills the guy that caused problems in their life? That's definitely illegal, but it's often justified in the story. Here we get to see Roger, a guy who's been abused by the world at every turn, and Eddie, a guy whose life has been completely in the shitter for the last 20-some-odd years, finally have something good happen to them. Roger, in particular, successfully gets his revenge. And yes, I think it is a type of justice for Roger to deprive the group that's making him a skittish, paranoid nut and who are also in the business of making poisons of some money so he can start a new life with a father he never knew. I am not telling you to do this in your real life, by the way, but this is the world of fiction. I feel like this point is getting lost nowadays, and I'll talk more about that in future content. About the only person who doesn't get to live their best life in the deal is Angelina, long ago having died in childbirth. I like to think she came with Raj and Eddie and is just hanging out with them in Belize, living her best ghost life or something. Let her have a dub too. She deserves it after the fate she's been dealt, and I kinda hope the writers would agree with that sentiment. She may not have gotten the shortest straw out of these three, but dying in childbirth still sucks. Hope the cat got out of there okay. If you want to simplify one of humanity's most enduring habits down to nothing, storytelling happens for three major reasons. To express a moral, to create an emotional response that is generally independent of that moral and is generally cathartic, and the absolute cop-out gutterball of because we like to do it. Yeah, I think you can generally say that if we tell a story, it's because we want to, especially if we relegate ourselves to only fiction and folklore, so I'm leaving it out here. Many folks, sometimes myself included as I noticed looking back on several of my own scripts, are too focused on the matter of morality. Not that I'm suddenly going to have cause to call that unimportant, but not every story exists simply to tell you how to act. We already looked at Eternal Darkness, and while you can say there is a message there, let's be honest with ourselves, it's mostly there because it's cool and because we love to see a monster get taken down. It's an emotional response, so a type of catharsis. Similarly with Bad Mojo. If you're upset that the criminal slimeball doesn't get his just desserts in what's considered to be the good ending, you're missing the entire point of the game. Without delving into the part about how and why he turned into a criminal slimeball, watching a guy who spends his entire life getting kicked around manage to get one over on the world that mistreats him constantly feels really good. So that's Bad Mojo, a game you probably wouldn't expect to be this depressing if you never heard much about it past the high concept, and definitely one a lot of people would never consider playing considering its premise is a little bit on the gross side to put it nicely. It's a shame because this means it's probably going to be relegated to the world of weird 90s things forever instead of ever being given its due. I didn't really say it, but the writing is pretty good too. I like all the hints you get are written in verse, and the team behind it put a ton of care into making their incredibly off-the-wall concept come to life. They really wanted to make it rise above being perceived as just a weird novelty. And hey, if nobody else is gonna do it... Apologies for the delay in getting this video out, but thank you very much for watching. Truth be told, the delays are entirely my fault. I really took my sweet time getting this together, and also I switched what script I was going to run this month, and by this month I guess I mean last month, at the last minute. Also, this game really doesn't record very well, but I did manage to get most of the cutscene recordings on my own. However, some gameplay clips have been borrowed from other sources. Those are linked in the description, and as usual, thank you very much to Plastic Alan for not only being the person who inspired me to play this game in the first place, but also for having footage of his streams up on his YouTube channel and saying that it's okay for me to use them for my projects. If you would like to help this project succeed, you should like the video, leave a comment if you have something to say, and subscribe to the channel. Make sure you click on the bell so that way you get updates about the newest entries to the Almanac whenever they are available. As well, it would be a great help to the Almanac if you could go to patreon.com/moonsidian, that's M00NSIDIAN, link in the description, and donate per month whatever amount of money you are able. Patrons of the Almanac will have access to special exclusive content and will get to see new entries a few days early. I also stream over on twitch.tv at 7 p.m. Central Standard Time, Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, although I'm going to be introducing Tuesday and Thursday streams for a little bit because I'm currently playing a very long game, and I would like to avoid people getting bored with it. With that, thank you once again for watching, once more apologies for the delay, and enjoy your evening.